Hey everyone, welcome to the Echo Podcast. My name is Ryan Becker and I am your host. On this podcast, we talk about issues of faith, life, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church that young adults face every single day. And so I get the privilege of sitting with two people and hashing out our perspectives and sharing just our experiences together. And on today's episode, we have two awesome guests. The first is Andrew Korp. Andrew is a theology major at Southern Adventist University and has become someone who's really close to me. I've been able to watch him grow through high school and college as well. He took a year to serve as a pastor out in Hawaii in the middle of his studies, and he's just returned this school year. And then the second is Rachel Beaver. Rachel is actually a recent alumnus of Southern. She graduated with a public relations major and is currently in the area and has become someone who's been a really good friend to this podcast. You probably have recognized her from past episodes. And so she is someone whose opinion and perspective I have really come to respect and enjoy hearing from. And so I won't keep you from them any longer. Welcome to Echo. Let's get started.
This episode of the Echo Podcast is sponsored by Southern Adventist University.
I see no way for this episode to not just go off the rails. I think this episode's going to go just so well because this is not a controversial topic, literally at all. It's not, a hotly discussed topic or, anything people are worried about. It's not like it comes up often. So I think, I don't think a lot of people are going to care about this, really. So with that, on that note,
way to sell the episode.
Yeah, no. Everything I just said, think the opposite, and that's how this is going to go.
Exactly.
Granted, everything I do goes off the rails, so it's just part of my life. No, I think this one is something that every single Christian, I would argue that outside of Christianity too, other faith traditions struggle with, regardless of leadership or a position, status, whatever. So lay members, church officers like elders and deacons, pastors especially, conference officials, union officials, division officials, and all the way, up to the GC level. All of these, we always come across situations where we end up going, I'm not really sure how this should be dealt with, or it's easy to see something from the outside and think that should have been handled differently, right? So I want to talk with the two of you about this. I think this is something that we have the opportunity to share our own perspectives and ideas on how we can better handle issues and matters of discipline in the church, and what discipline could or should look like. And I think that regardless of, because this is something that affects everyone, this is something that no one is not allowed to have an opinion on. Like, I think everyone is everyone is entitled to, I think, what is a worthwhile opinion, even to just hear out. So don't want you to think that because you're not like in your 50s and haven't, pastored churches for 30 years, that you can't speak on this, because even those pastors on occasion, and I've seen it happen time and time again, they'll turn to colleagues and say, I don't know what to do here, or they'll just handle it wrong. Right. So with that, I think the first thing to speak to that I'd love to hear from you guys, and Andrew, we'll start with you, is what is your history with the Seventh-day Adventist Church? How long have you been in it? Yeah, just kind of your overall background with Adventism.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, born into it. My parents are both teachers in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, so I grew up with it. I grew up with the teachings. I grew up in the church. I grew up in the schooling, all the way up through that. So my history is very much Adventism. Pretty much at its core.
All right, cool. Rachel, what about you?
And I am the polar opposite. I've only been in the church coming up on 4 years. Was the first time I even walked into one. So I'm still pretty new to the game, and compared to Andrew's lifetime achievements.
Same here. Rachel Held Evans, who is now, she died last year, prolific Christian author, non-denominational. But the one thing that she shared about why she was a Christian still was that it was it's her first language, so to speak. Like, it's always going to be the thing that everything is filtered through, whether she identifies that way or not. And that's very much, Andrew, I'm in the same boat as you, as having grown up Adventist. Like, it is my first language. It's my first home. And so there, no matter how far away from Adventism I could go, which I don't think I'll ever go go away from it, but no matter how far I could go, it will still be a very core part of my identity, right? And those things will still come out. So, no, I very much value the fact that there's two widely different experiences here. It'd be really funny though if you both landed on the same things and agreed all the time. So
we'll see what happens.
what is a situation that you think, or that you've a disciplinary situation? Maybe you saw a friend or a family member or just another church member either go through discipline or make some mistake and be punished. What have you seen any of that ever play out? And if so, like, is there anything you can speak to on that situation and how you felt about it?
Mm-hmm. There's one specific instance that comes to mind, and it's a little bit different. It's not necessarily someone did something wrong or anything, but there was, when I was a youth pastor in Hawaii, we had a case where there was someone who was actually mentally challenged in the church. And the issue with that was that this person was so mentally challenged they weren't necessarily receiving help, and they were trying to turn help to the church, which weren't necessarily equipped to handle that. But she was kind of making like death threats and this kind of thing within the church, and that was a really hard thing to do, because what do? Do we keep her there and try to like help her out, or do we actually have to ask her to leave? And that was a really hard situation that the church had to deal with. And in the end, we did actually eventually asking her to leave, because we saw it as we need to protect the flock, of the church. With this whole situation. But it was definitely a difficult situation that we had to deal with the kind of that side of discipline. Like, do we keep her here? Do we try to help her? Or is that grace discipline thing? Or do we have to let her go and let professional people handle it?
So were you serving on leadership when that was going on?
I was,
okay,
yes.
So what were some of those conversations like? If because there's a lot that gets talked about, a lot that gets considered that a lot of people just never encountered, never experienced, never know about. So what were some of those conversations? Was there ever a time where you had to convince people, like, no, we should ask her to leave, or no, we should have her stay, or how give us a kind of behind the curtain look at what those conversations were like.
For sure. There was definitely conversations where we had two differing viewpoints on it. We had someone who was kind of in that. She had a little bit of background with that, and helping people with mentally challenged things. And so we had her kind of fighting for her, but then we also had the pastor who said, I think this is the wise thing to do, is let her leave, because we need to protect our flock. We need to protect the people within the church. And if she's doing these things, we're not going to be able to shepherd people in. We're not going to be able to bring people in. We're not going to be able to keep people here. And so there were definitely conversations like that at those leadership meetings, where we had a couple people over here who were siding with her, and a couple people over here that were siding with the pastor, and it was definitely a difficult road to navigate. But I think the pastor handled it very well in approaching that whole situation, which is what I think all these situations need to be dealt with first and foremost is with love. And he addressed the need and the other side, what they were saying, and in a very effective and loving way, and said, look, I see what you're saying. I understand your point, but help me to look at the whole picture here, and just was very loving in his approach. But I got to see that all play out, and it was definitely a learning experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the woman in question, was she in a leadership position?
No, she was not. She was a regular,
just a member.
Yeah, just a member.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Rachel, what about you? Have you seen anything in your short time?
I haven't personally had to experience anything like that, luckily. I know there have been issues, but they've all been things that I've just kind of like heard through the grapevine, sort of things, and nothing to that extent, like death threats, mostly just like, young people having premarital sex, or, a Sabbath school leader kind of doing their own thing instead of wanting to, stick to the system, all things that to me seem kind of petty, but but luckily I was not actually involved in, so I don't have too much experience.
Well, I will say, even on the side of premarital sex, there is a I'm about to walk a very fine line.
Here we go.
All right, here we go.
So walk with me here.
Okay.
one of the biggest one of the biggest arguments that a lot of proponents against abortion, or those we would call pro-life, one of the biggest arguments that they make, especially in kind of the more extreme cases of a pregnancy via rape or otherwise, is that, well, the baby didn't do it, so why are we going to make the baby suffer? Right? That is something that gets brought up. I've heard brought up a lot as an answer to that argument. Whether someone agrees with that or not, I'm just saying that that argument exists.
Right.
Yeah.
The one thing I wish is that when it comes to premarital sex where a pregnancy is formed out of it, I wish we would actually use that same logic in those situations. Like this is an area where I wish there would be a little bit more grace extended, because at the same time that you're punishing or disciplining, let's just use the word, let's be intentional with that word of disciplining, which is discipline is consequences with the intent to repair or restore or and get someone back to a place, a healthy place. And I wish when someone is pregnant, regardless of how they got pregnant, but just as a matter of they're pregnant now, I wish we wouldn't harm the baby by kicking them out and depriving that baby of what could be a very loving and supportive community that can help raise it alongside this couple that maybe were not expecting it at all, and now they're on this journey, like it or not.
Right.
I think it's different if it's just if not that I think the church should go like prying into people's personal lives and doing like a sex check, right? Are you not? If it is discovered that someone is doing something that is against the codes of conduct that being a part of a community has naturally, right? Every community, every group that you join has rules. Regardless, you join a country club, you have a group of friends, there's rules that if you break, you're out. And premarital sex happens to be one of those, not necessarily like you do this and you're automatically out sort of things, but it's the one that everyone thinks of. Let's just be honest. Like, let's just speak to that elephant in the room. And I think that if it's discovered and there is nothing that has happened yet, that's where we can sit down and have room for intentional conversation and working through that. But when it comes to a pregnancy now formed, I think that's where we err on the side of grace. That's my personal opinion, by the way. But that's how I feel. I don't know how you guys feel. If you agree with that, disagree, feel free to disagree. You're just wrong.
No, I agree with that, because I think that what we need to be doing as a church with these discipline things is that, we believe in this grace of like you said, of change. And when that discipline comes in, it's not necessarily just, oh, I'm here to punish you. Like, I'm here to discipline you and show you that there's a better way. Like, and there's a better way to do life. And that's what that whole discipline thing is. And the fact is that, like, when Jesus came into people's lives and he showed them grace, he left them changed. And that's the whole thing about, like, what we need to be doing as a church. We need to be loving people, but also letting them know that we want to move them forward and we want to walk alongside of them in that process. Like you said, with this whole pregnancy thing, like, yeah, I think you're right. We need to err on the side of grace in that, because now we have an opportunity to love this person or love whoever it is, and then love this child too, or whoever's coming out. We have an opportunity to bring someone else into this loving, nurturing family, and we need to come alongside of these people and help them grow through life with that first mindset of grace, of disciplining with grace.
So where would you say that the line is? Because like you said, from your story, there was a woman, like, there came a point where it's like, okay, this has gone too far. Where would you say that line is for both of you?
I think that line is where we cross the line is where, like, in that whole situation, in that extreme situation, you had the non-extreme, I had the extreme, but in that extreme situation where the safety is threatened by the church community. Like, that was very much the pastor there. He was saying, like, look, the safety of our flock is being threatened. And I think that is kind of where that line is. If we can accept this person and love this person and come alongside of this person without threatening the safety of our church, then, like, why are we not doing that?
The problem that a lot of churches run into, and actually my church ran into this very recently, is that there's a lot of individuals that have been kicked out of a certain church, right, of a specific, like, local church. There's some that have actually been banned from several churches. every church wants to be the church that says, like, we believe in second chances, and we believe in, and maybe this person really has changed or can change or anything like that, right? And so, yeah, we know they've been kicked out of this church, but let's give them a try here. And actually, there's a lot of malicious people that actually take advantage of that attitude, right, that forgiveness attitude, and that's true for abusive relationships. That's true for friendships and relationships, as in general. But at some point, it's not even just the safety of the church itself and the church community. If there is someone like that, you also have an obligation to protect those who are not yet even in your church community. Right?
Exactly.
It's not hiding the truth. It's not hiding anything. It's simply saying, like, look, if this is a person like in your situation that is actually giving death threats, then what does that spell for a visitor or a guest?
Exactly.
What does that mean for them? And churches are private property, so they have the right. Like, you may think, oh, well, then the person will just stand outside and warn people about this terrible church, which has happened. And the beauty of being a church on private property is that you have the right to tell someone to leave and actually enforce that on no trespassing. And that is a boundary that churches set. The problem with enforcing a boundary like that is you always look mean. But I think the one thing when it comes to church discipline in general that I really wish everyone would have a little bit more of is a little bit more patience and understanding. To say, like, okay, if it's at the point that this church has called the police to have someone escorted off the property, like, it had to escalate to that point. There's not a lot of churches that just start there. And honestly, you can't. Like, most of the time, if you call the police to say this person's on my property, the first thing they'll say is, did you tell them that they cannot be there? They will actually put the ball back in your court. You have to have made it expressly known that person is not welcome there and that they need to leave the property immediately. If you have not done that, then police are like, well, sorry, do that first, and then we can intervene if they still won't leave. So there are steps to, like, a process like that too. So yeah, I do wish there was a little bit more patience and understanding on the part of members. But what I want to ask, I guess, at this point is, first of all, do you think that's a fair line? You're the one who asked the question.
Oh, for personal safety, absolutely. I recognize that his is clearly an extreme case. And so if safety is the line, then what do we define as safety?
Well, there's and it's not even just physical safety; it's spiritual safety as well. This is why many Adventists know of shepherd's rod, and there are groups that are out to intentionally cause spiritual or strife in churches, conflict in churches, in order to even potentially gain trust, flip a church, or even be able to then share their own theological ideas. And there is a very big need and obligation on the part of pastors and leadership to be on the lookout for those things. And it's not that you're trying to hide other belief options from your members. It's rather, if this is a group that is proven again and again or is known for kind of manipulative behaviors and practices, then we have to tell them, leave. Like, there's no it can be very dangerous to the spiritual health of your church as well as the physical health of your church to allow not other ideas in, but specifically malicious ideas in, if that makes sense, or hostile ideas. So that's how I tend to view that. But and I speak on that from a little bit of pastoral experience. But the downside of being a leader is you will always wear the black hat, so to speak. I don't know where that phrase comes from. So if there's some origin to that phrase that is really bad, someone please tell me, and I will stop using it. So the idea of wearing, my mom was the principal of an academy, and during that time, there were times where staff members and faculty didn't have their contracts renewed, and so personnel committee would make that decision, but she would have to be the one to inform the person whether or not she agreed with the decision of the committee. She would have to quote wear the the messenger. She'd have to be the messenger, and people would take that out on her and my family, even though she's not, like, all she is the messenger. Now, granted, she could have agreed with the decision, then she's no longer just but still, like, she's still the one that has to sit down with them in a room and tell them you will no longer have a job. That's hard. That's why I say patience and understanding. However, that doesn't free the church or excuse any times that the church, I think, has done that inappropriately.
Correct. Yeah, 100%.
So what would you say is an example of, what would you say is an example of something that is where the church has done something wrong, where where we haven't done a good job of balancing grace and discipline, or we have actually crossed that line and caused more harm than good?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things, and I don't know, I think this may be one of the number one reasons why we have so many young adults and youth leaving our church, is because we don't have that patience and that endurance to actually connect with these people that walk through the doors. And the first thing that we do when they walk in is cast judgment upon them, because they don't fit within our Adventist standard of what we're supposed to look like. You have that first person, that young adult who is, like you said, who is pregnant, whatever, come into the doors of the church for the first time, and we immediately cast judgment upon them, or they're wearing jewelry or whatever it may be, and we cast that judgment upon them without first handling the situation with patience, with endurance, with grace, and saying, look, you've come in here for the first time, we're here to love you, we're here to accept you, but like I said, we're also here to help you change, to be molded into that character of Christ, right? And I think that, at least in my experience, what I've seen is that discipline is given way too quickly when someone walks in through the door for the first time, and the judgment just comes in, and then the discipline comes in on that first interaction, where that discipline needs to be coming in later. If we have someone who's been in the church for years and years and years and years, and who's still practicing something, that's a different story, and those things need to be handled differently too, with that patience, with that love, with that grace, and coming alongside of them. But too many times I think we push people out the first time that we see them.
Well, I would even argue that up until, I almost want to say early 20s, but really at least through the teenage years, at least to the age of 18, I'm tempted to say that we should be treating teenagers the same way we treat new believers. Right. And saying, like, we need to be extending more grace to them, because even if they've grown up hearing it, that does not mean that they've either accepted it, or they've really learned it, or been able to ingrain it in themselves, or maybe the very people that taught them those things also did something to hurt them, so they've abandoned everything that person told them. Like that happens with youth pastors and youth leaders, or parents. So I do think that there is a lot more room for grace when it comes to dealing with teenagers. Right. I do understand that it becomes, and this is where I speak to the other end of it, that becomes very complicated in a school environment, where you and it can be in a church environment where parents very involved in youth ministry would look at someone receiving grace and saying, what does that teach my kid? So that's why I say, like, it's a very thin line, and it's a very hard line to walk for a leadership, right? Because there are just so many different things that you have to balance. Yeah. I will say there is one beautiful thing in Adventism that I very much appreciate. So we cannot disfellowship someone. Typically, it's in the church manual that before you disfellowship someone, which literally means to remove them as a member because of disciplinary action, you cannot do that without a few steps prior. And one of those steps, unfortunately, I cannot remember the word. And if someone in the room were to shout it out randomly, I wouldn't be upset, but I think it starts with a P. But basically, when someone is caught in doing something bad, like doing something that is harmful to the community, or just caught in sin, the thing you do before disfellowshipping them is basically, it's like a year-long probationary period. And before you can put them on even that probationary period, you have to call a church business meeting, which is just, technically, your church, every time they meet on a Saturday morning, is also a business session. Like if you've ever voted someone who's getting baptized, like that was your church acting a business session. But there's a business session that has to happen where you actually have to you have to notify the person who's being discussed, letting them know this is the time, place of the meeting. You are welcome to come. Like they have to be notified for that meeting to, like by registered mail, or by phone or whatever. Like there has to be confirmed correspondence with them, and then that person has the opportunity to show up and defend themselves or speak to their own experience or whatever. So that person is in if things are done correctly, that person still has a voice in the conversation. At least, now it might be them against the church, unfortunately, but ultimately that person does have the opportunity to stand up for themselves.
Right.
And at minimum, it's a year of probationary period, and then the disfellowshipping isn't automatic. They have to reopen the whole matter and discuss it again and see if there's been any changes or any updates in the last year, which is huge. Like that, there's a lot of grace extended in that process.
Right. For sure.
That I'm very grateful for if it's followed correctly. I cannot remember what the word is for probation. It's gone.
Oh, it's a different word than
it's
probation.
a different word than
said
probation.
It was a P word. So.
It is a P word, but we'll just we'll throw it in the show notes if when I look it up later. But I do want to ask this: what do you wish leadership would do as they handle these things better? And this is going to be like wrap up. Like, what do you wish leadership? What do you wish to see in leaders as they handle disciplinary matters in the church? And I know this one's a thinker. Like, don't worry, you're good. For me, I think the one thing that I wish leadership would be aware of, or be more tightly aware of, is, and I'm not going to say control the narrative, that's not it at all, but they need to be aware of what narrative is, or narratives are being created by each decision that they have available to them, or each option they have available to them. So if we go down route A, what does that look like? And how do we actually manage and respond to that? And can we actually justify the response? Like, is the response from members actually justified if we do this? Do they have a case here if we do route A or route B or route C? I wish that leadership, as you had mentioned earlier, would be a little slower to action.
Yeah.
And I won't say I wish they would pray more, because most leaders that I've talked to and that I've seen handle disciplinary issues pray a lot. But obviously there's always room for more prayer. For sure. But yeah, this is your opportunity to speak to actual leadership here. What do you want them to know regarding disciplinary matters?
I don't know, bouncing off of that too, I think that you're right. I liked how you put that narrative. That's a really cool analogy. What are we saying to the community around us with each action that we take? How are we showing ourselves? How are we showing that even though maybe sometimes we do have to make a difficult call, but why did we make that difficult call? Was there logical, actual, concrete reasons for that call that we had to make, even though it was tough, and as people see that, they lay out the evidence, people say, okay, that makes sense, and that is a process. Like you said, if we slow down that process and we really, mold it over prayer, like you were saying, just praying about it and laying out the concrete reasons and slowing that process down, I think the outside world would see us a whole lot differently than being the typical stereotype that I've heard so much of. Oh, they judge us all the time. The judging church. If we slowed that process down to the point where people see that we're extending grace in every area that we can, but yet we're also being disciplinary to protect our people, the safety of the spiritual safety, the physical safety, then I think the world will start to see us a lot different, and maybe a lot more in a more attractive way.
Yeah, absolutely. Rachel, what about you?
I would just say that, like you both said, really take the time to make sure that the decision you're making is right. Because I know a lot of times in these kind of moments in crisis, people are very jumped to kind of make a decision, and then all of a sudden people already have a judgment in mind. It's like they don't really even need to think about it because they already know in a way what they want to do. And it's kind of hard to, just shift your way of thinking and be like, okay, let's stop. Let's really think about this for a little while. Because I know, going back to that first example with the couple I knew who was having premarital sex, I know for a fact that those conversations never happened with the two parties in question. It was brought forth by parents who found out. And that was something that I highly disagreed with. I mean, they ended up they got grace, of course, but still, it's like
they didn't have a voice.
They didn't have a voice, and so listen to the voices, and don't let people or the voices around you, cloud pointing them towards God.
Yeah, and
that makes sense.
Don't confuse what is an honest mistake or even a moment of weakness with intentional malice.
Right, that's a big one too. Yeah.
That's and I think that really is that's when we tend to err on the side of punishment rather than of grace, is when we make that mistake. So Andrew and Rachel, thank you guys so much for sharing your perspectives, and I've really appreciated this conversation. This has been really cool for me as well. So and to our listeners, thank you guys so much for being on this journey with us and for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to Echo and for being on this journey with us. If you're watching on YouTube, we hope that you'll leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button. If you're listening on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever podcatching app that you like the most, we hope that you'll hit that subscribe button, that you'll leave a review, and that you'll engage with us. And also for more content from Project Refresh that's like Echo and some of the other shows that we host, then head on over to theprojectrefresh.org. Thank you so much for your support. It means the world to us, and we'll see you next week.
This episode of the Echo Podcast is sponsored by Southern Adventist University.